Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. Let me get you guys set up here. I'll put a little sunscreen up there so that my phone don't cook in the heat. Oops. Not that it gets really hot around here. Let's try this thing out. Alright, in today's video we are going to be talking about how the Federal Reserve and the powers that be are going to be keeping elevated inflation expectations through the concepts of uncertainty. Right now, everybody out there is very well aware of the credible threat of tariffs that are going to be hitting the economy, hitting the people, hitting the global supply chains and distribution networks, and everybody is quite aware of the problems that are faced out there. But then when they come up with a solution like, hey, we've come up with a trade deal, or we come up with a possibility to alleviate the problems that we are now seeing out there, all of a sudden they say, hey, even though we've done this, we've got this deal, there's still going to be uncertainty going into the future, because that is the monetary policy, is to make sure that the people are very uncertain about what it is that's taking place coming into the future. And with that uncertainty, you will end up with elevated inflation expectations, which is the goal. It's not necessarily to try to create a situation in which that manufacturing is going to return back to the United States. That would take years, if not decades, to accomplish. But the idea of an elevated inflation expectation is almost instantaneous when it comes to what the message is being delivered to the people themselves. So when you look at the message that is being delivered, even though they have come up with a deal, there's still quite elevated inflation expectations due to the uncertainty, because they are keeping that uncertainty moving within the narrative. Like, they want to make sure that people do not let that go. They want to make sure that that is still consistent and still being pushed out there through all the different channels of communication that people are receiving. I left a link down in the description talking about how the Federal Reserve wants uncertainty. This is a video that I done over a month ago describing exactly this, how they are going to keep the uncertainty going regardless. Even if the threats of tariffs are alleviated, the uncertainty is going to be continuing going into the future. Like, that's the name of the game: confusion and uncertainty. And by having that confusion and uncertainty, they can keep the open-ended monetary policy going, where they use their words to try and guide the market. I mean, even just recently with the Federal Reserve's own statements talking about what it is that they plan on doing into the future, they are using the credible threats of tariffs, right? The uncertainty of tariffs. We don't know what's happening. We got to wait and see. We're data dependent on what it is that this is actually going to do. This, again, is pushing the uncertainty that is out there. Everywhere you look, this is what they are doing. Now, what I am very certain of was the monetary policy was seeking to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time. I don't know how many times I've said those words. 400-500 times here on this channel. The Federal Reserve is seeking to achieve monetary policy that is with an inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time. This is what they're doing. The only way to get it is to make sure that you are not certain about the future. If you were certain, you wouldn't have that elevated inflation expectation. But because of the credible threat of tariffs and not knowing what it is that's going to be coming, and even if it does have a deal, it's still left uncertain, that is how they are creating that situation. You think about it, the Federal Reserve attempted to find inflation back during the Great Financial Crisis. They were failing miserably. They took the balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion. That failed them. It didn't work. They did not find the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. I don't know how many people realized how big of a problem that really was for them. Like, most people just kind of throw that off like, oh well, that was from the past. Nobody cares. Not important. That was probably one of the most profound things that was taking place with the Federal Reserve. They were failing. Like, they could not work their monetary policy anymore. But nobody recognized it. They had Fed funds rate operating at zero interest rate on the Fed funds. And the neutral interest rate was right there with them. They could not stimulate the economy with the dropping of interest rates. They were failing miserably. However, nobody really recognizes that as the problem, and that they ultimately needed elevated inflation expectations and elevated inflation to save their monetary policy. And here it is. Everybody looks at the Federal Reserve like they don't know what they're doing, like they're about ready to fail. They have no chance of succeeding, and yet here it is. They have positioned themselves exactly the way they said that they wanted it. And so when I think about every time I find an article that says, oh, hey, by the way, we came to a deal, but we're still really uncertain about it, is to keep that uncertainty in your mind. This is how they control the monetary policy, is through the elevated inflation expectations that then create the environment that they are looking for. If they want interest rates to go up, all they have to do is literally put the information out there that the Federal Reserve is in a position in which that they are thinking or wanting to have a idea of stimulating the economy to try and support the environment out there. That would create an inflationary expectations, generally supporting the economy. If the Federal Reserve came out with a message that says we are incredibly worried about the labor market becoming, incredibly weak and unemployment rising significantly, you would watch the interest rates fall. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to change the position of the Fed funds rate. All they have to do is deliver a message. And it's working. Most people can't see that. Most people will not see it. In fact, I would assume that 99.9% of the people will have missed that. To misunderstand what it is that the Federal Reserve is doing with their monetary policy now. They don't adjust rates. Like, they hardly adjust rates at all. Think about it. When they do it, it is so fast and furious that people hardly even understand what it is that's going on. They drop rates almost immediately when during a recessionary pressure, they take them down to zero without any real chance of anybody understanding an adjustment downward. It's just dropped instantaneously. And when they raised rates, they shot them up like a rocket. And what I find very interesting about that is that even though they had put interest rates on the fastest clip up, right, mortgage rates shot up almost instantly and plateaued out, even as the Federal Reserve was trying to do their stepping up of elevated interest rates. Most people miss that. Like, the market and interest rates within mortgages, within the treasury, within all the credit cards or car loans and all that other stuff are literally being moved on the expectations of what it is that's planning on coming for the future. It's not coming from the adjustment of Fed funds rate. Think about it. The Fed has been sitting still for a while, for a long while, hardly doing anything. Even the talk about unwinding the balance sheet, okay? That's the only other position in which that they actually moved. They didn't really do anything for months and months except for balance sheet adjustment. And so to understand that, they were allowing assets to roll off the balance sheet. When that happens, when assets are rolling off the balance sheet, those are dollars coming back to the Federal Reserve. And unless they deploy those dollars back into the economy, they are essentially being destroyed. We are in quantitative tightening right now. This should have a deflationary expectations amongst the people, but they don't have that deflationary expectations. They have an elevated inflation expectations due to the credible threat of tariffs. Do you see the counterbalancing that this is doing? I mean, literally, like, they counterbalance the effects of a quantitative tightening that would typically be put onto the people out there, a deflationary expectation that would come from it, right? If quantitative easing creates inflation, then quantitative tightening would reduce inflation, okay? Even cause a deflationary scenario. But instead, we have elevated tariffs at the exact same time, or the elevated credible threat of tariffs at the exact same time, which counterbalance that. I don't know how many people see it that way. Probably none, right? But I mean, you think about it. How many times have you heard about the pressures of a recession that are coming, but yet the idea of a recession is a dropping of asset prices for a lot of people out there. I know it's, 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, or at least that's the way that they originally described it. And who knows what the hell a recession is anymore. I mean, I would assume that we have been in recession for quite some time, but officially that's not what was declared out there. So if you have recessionary pressures that are coming, which are usually deflationary aspects to the economy, and at the same time you have elevated tariff or credible threats of tariffs, then you're having a counterbalancing to that. And although it's very uncomfortable and painful for most people to experience out there, I believe that is what has taken place. Look at lumber. Lumber's cheap. Lumber is so cheap right now. And nobody took it into consideration that the lumber prices were going to stay low just a couple of months ago. 2 months ago, it would be very, very difficult to find anybody out there who believed that lumber prices were going to stay low. Everybody knew that it was going to jump. Everybody knew that there was going to be 25% tariff on Canadian lumber, and it was going to cause lumber prices to go to the moon. Who was the one person out here who was giving you some sort of reasonable expectations of what was going to take place? The Uneducated Economist said, don't even think about that stuff. It's not going to even matter here in a couple of weeks. And sure enough, that's the case. So many people have got themselves focused in on the mainstream media news for information that they are literally being misguided on purpose to control the monetary policy. It is being done on purpose. I mean, if you want to see something that was really incredible, is to go back and read Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World. This was a speech that John Williams had given back in November of 2018, talking exactly the problem that they were facing. Low neutral interest rate, low Fed funds rate, and a very low inflation expectation. And that the idea of trying to push inflation so that they can make up for the fact that they failed to achieve the 2% target was described in that speech. Less than 2 years later, that's exactly what the Federal Reserve did for their monetary position, is to move into average inflation targeting. In fact, it's called flexible average inflation targeting. Nobody knows this. I mean, it's not hidden. It's not hidden from anywhere. You can go and Google it right now, Federal Reserve flexible average inflation targeting. And you will find out that that is the monetary policy that is being conducted right now. And it is seeking to achieve inflation that is moderately above 2% for some time, to make up for the fact they failed to achieve the 2% target over the previous 10 years. They're succeed. This is exactly what it is that they wanted for the economy. Like, there is no problem that they are facing. They have alleviated their problem. In fact, they described it just like that. The problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. Here it is. Persistently elevated inflation expectations saving the Fed's monetary policy. I mean, everybody else wants to look at it so much differently than this and give it some kind of really artistic fantasy about what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do, but yet they describe it very, very clearly within their own speeches, with their own statements. Now, these speeches and these statements, they're not to the public. They don't give these speeches and statements to the public. When they do that, it is a much different story that they are telling, because there's two different communications that are taking place. One to the mainstream media to keep that narrative, and the other one is to the other central bankers. And when you see that they are doing two different communications, it becomes very clear why. Because the communication to the mainstream media through the narrative, trying to control that narrative, that's the monetary policy. When they talk to the other central bankers about it, it's describing how they're going to do that. Now, we have broken this down on this channel over and over and over again through many different videos, member-only live stream videos, where we broke down those Federal Reserve speeches. It's $1 a month. $1 a month to join the channel to get access to all those videos that we have done. Lots of work went into that. To not only find these speeches, but then to recognize what it is that's being stated within them. so that we can then decipher through all this stuff that's going on out there in order to understand the true monetary policy, the true nature of it. Once you see it, once you understand that, all this stuff becomes very clear. It's not uncertain at all. I'm very certain about the situation. I mean, to me, this isn't confusing. This isn't confusing at all. And I understand that a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, it's because of the New World Order and global governance and all this other stuff that's going on out there. And I laugh when I hear that, because there was a time in my life that I actually believed that. And I'm not saying that it isn't happening. What I'm saying is that it's secondary to the underlying economic forces that are taking place out there. And I'm able to recognize those underlying economic forces and then be able to then understand this, what's going on right now, with the certainty of why it is that they're doing it for their monetary policy. Most people don't see it that way, so it's very uncertain, right? And that's part of it, is to keep people uncertain about it. All right, 15 minutes into this, let's continue on. Don't worry, baby, it's going to be all right. Uncertainty can be guided light. I hear voices, ridiculous voices, out in the slipstreams. Let's go over ground. Take your head out of the mud, baby. All right, that's kind of very tune-like. All right, UE question. Do you think there might be collusion between the banks, lenders, and the home manufacturers to limit the new housing starts? No, absolutely not. You know why? It's because I know builders right now who don't deal with any of those people, and they're not building homes right now. They're cash builders. They're literally cash builders. They can care less about financial institutions or anything else, and they're not building. What does that say? Right? In fact, that's why lumber is the #1 indicator. You know that? It's because there's cash builders out there, and they're going to take advantage of the situation before anybody else does, because they are in a position in which that they can do it. Most people who make the decision that they want to build a home have to go to the financial institutions in order to get it. You got to get a loan, right? But there are cash builders out there who don't go to those people. They can speculate on building a home with nobody else other than their own understanding of what it is that's happening out there. They go down, they build it, buy the supplies, they get the permits, they do everything themselves without anybody else involved. So when those people are out of the game and they're not playing the game, it doesn't matter. There's not going to be an influx of new starts coming into the market, just simply because the position of profiting is not there. If you think that if I start this house today, and I don't care if you're getting a loan for it or if you're a cash builder, right? It doesn't matter. If you think today I start this home, by the time I complete it, if I will not be able to sell it for the price that I am assuming that I can today, and it's going to drop going into the future, I won't start. I won't start. That's just all there is to it. Why would you do it? It would be like, okay, man, I think I'm going to be making $500,000 on this house, but by the time I finish it, it's probably only going to be $450,000. Then you wouldn't start the house. You'd be like, no way. I'm only going to start this house if I'm guaranteed that I'm going to get the profit that I'm anticipating, if not more. If the prices are moving up, they'll flood in. Everybody will flood in. They want to take advantage of those increasing prices. But if the uncertainty says, oh man, house prices are going to fall into the future, or the possibilities of it going down into the future are very prevalent within the economy, people are not going to start homes. It doesn't matter how people collude into it. There's a cash builder out there. They can care less about your collusion. In fact, they would rather you collude to suppress this new starts, because they would be the only ones building a home. So they would actually love that situation. It ain't happening. That's not the case. The case comes from uncertainty about the buyer. The buyer traffic needs to improve. Once buyer traffic improves, it's going to be built on. You're going to find lumber just flying through the roof as far as the prices go, because there's very limited supply out there. The mill curtailment has been very prevalent for the last better than a year, over a year. So the inventory levels are very low. And the demand is also very low. The moment that switches and the demand increases, how are they going to be able to supply? It's not like mills can just all of a sudden just hear all the supply you could ever imagine. Right? It takes time to ramp up supply. There is a limited amount of space available in the kilns. This is something that I don't think a lot of people even consider. that there is something called kiln-dried lumber, where they literally put all the lumber into a giant room, heat that room up to a very hot temperature to get the moisture, all the water out of the wood so that it's dry. That process has only so much space and it takes so much time. There is nothing you can do to increase that outside of building new kilns. So once that production is up to capacity, you're not going to be able to ramp up any more production no matter how many trees you cut down or how many saw blades you get moving. That's something that not a lot of people even take into consideration, that there is only so much, it's a bottlenecking within the production of it. Now, can they ramp up production from here? Absolutely they could. Could they increase capacity? Yes, for sure. But once they reach full, that's it. That's as much as they're going to be able to do without new investment going into building more kilns. And again, not a lot of people discuss that stuff at all. So if you have a ramping up of buyer traffic, the home builders are going to jump into the game. They're going to be like, oh yeah, it's time, let's get building, because they want to build. Like, there is no situation in which that they don't want to build, right? They want to build no matter what. But if they're sitting in a position in which it says it's not going to be profitable, no matter how much they want it, it doesn't exist. Like, they can want it to be profitable all they want, it doesn't work. They have to have it be profitable in order for them to start it. So they can want it the entire time, even if they're starting it or not. They'll never not want to start. They want to work. Think about it. If you're not swinging hammers, you're not making money, you know? So it has to be understood that way. There is no greed and manipulation in the sense that you're not gonna build anything. Like, I'm gonna sit here and not build picnic tables to try and limit the amount of picnic tables out there. That doesn't make any sense. Right? The moment that a mill wants to curtail development, there's going to be other mills out there going, well, we're profitable, we're going to keep going. Right? The only reason why all of them do it all together is because unanimously they are looking at it as not a profitable situation. Some mills will continue to operate, but if the price gets too low, mills are going to curtail. They're not going to produce if they're not profiting. It's the same thing with builders, or the same thing as you. Like, would you go to your job and say, hey man, all I want is enough to pay the electricity, the water, the garbage, my rent, and some food, and a little light entertainment, and that's all I want? Of course not, right? You're gonna go for as much as you can. I want all that stuff plus more. Same thing with the mill. Like, they're not gonna produce and just break even. They want to produce for a profit. Same thing with the builders or anybody else. All right. Yesterday, Nouriel Roubini called for a recession in Q4, Q1. So it looks like lumber won't pick back up. I wouldn't trust that dude to save my life. To be honest with you, didn't he call for a recession like 2 years ago as well? I wouldn't trust that dude to save my life. He is part of this propagandized information being delivered there to you to guide you through. Don't trust any of that stuff. In fact, it's better that if you are finding information on the news, to discredit it, to just say that's worthless information. The only information that you should be getting from the news is confirmation of what it is that you have already known from your deep dive research into understanding what it is that's truly happening out there, because the news is pure propaganda, 100%. Even the news articles that I leave down in the description are literally there to share the idea of what it is that's being discussed out there. I don't use that for information. Most of the information that I am getting, I usually get firsthand through the lumber industry, and then I try to confirm that through some of the articles or positions that you can find out, or links or whatever that are happening out there on the internet. It's almost impossible to be informed through mainstream media. In fact, I know it's impossible, because everything that I was reading about lumber, every single article that I have ever read about lumber is inaccurate. Every one of them. Like, every one. Like, some of it's really good. Like, they do really good at describing most of the stuff, but then they get it wrong. At the end of the day, they end up getting it wrong. And they misguide the people and misinform them. And I saw this firsthand during the COVID pandemic. When prices were rolling up and going up to their all-time highs, the talk of greed and manipulation was running rampant through the mainstream media, through the internet, Everybody was talking about it. And I was like laughing at them. I'm like, you guys are so wrong. This is a supply chain breakdown that has taken place, causing the prices to move up through inelastic demand. There is no doubt in my mind about this. And that once you find the production ramping up, the prices are going to fall back down to normal. And nobody's going to be able to explain it except for me, because everybody else is misguided. They are thinking it's greed and manipulation that is creating the situation, so therefore they would never understand why it went back down to normal. Right? Once you see it in the fashion that is the reality of the situation, and not some hyped up, delusional, misguided, propagandized information coming out of the mainstream media, you can look at that mainstream media stuff and go like, yeah, that ain't right. That ain't true. Noriel, Rubini, or any of those other, Elron or what, any of those people, like they're all of them are paid, literally paid to say certain things, to not say certain things. That's how that mainstream media works. You realize that? Like, they aren't out there necessarily giving their own opinion. They might be, but they're like, hey, we need you to talk about these things, and this is how you're going to get paid to do it. And they're like, whatever, and then they go do that, and then they spread that information. How is it otherwise? Across multiple media outlets, you will hear the same repetitive statements. It's because they're getting paid to say that. You guys seen it. You guys seen the videos where, they'll go through multiple media outlets and they're literally saying the same thing word for word. Yeah. That's why. It's like, hey, we need you to make this statement. We need this narrative pushed out there, and we're going to pay you to do it. And it totally works. I mean, I've known other YouTubers who have told me that they had corporations contact them saying, hey, we will pay you to post these articles and to interview these people. Now, I've never been approached, because I would love that. I would spread that stuff all over I would tell everybody about it. Hey, these people are wanting to pay me to spread this information. They don't come to me like that because they probably know that I would. Like, I ain't one of those greedy, money hungry people who just do whatever they're told for money. That's not me, right? I don't do that. So if somebody ever approached me like that, I would be all over. I would share that with everybody. So I've never been approached like that. But I've heard of other YouTubers who have. And so it leads me to believe that, yes, this information is paid for, propagandized information. All the stuff you find out there on the mainstream media. All of it. Like 100%. I'm not saying there isn't truth or facts. Right? There's truth and facts in it. But it's that message, that narrative that they are pushing with it. All right, 27 minutes into this. I got a few more minutes here with 329 people watching, 65 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. All right, let me roll this up here a little bit and get you guys straightened up. All right. There's been a few content creators that shared actual emails from companies. Yeah. And see, that's where I'm kind of getting at. I know it takes place out there. I mean, I know people personally who have been approached. I never have. Like, I've never been, I have been approached through sponsorships, right? But that's not the same thing as delivering particular information. Like, when you do a sponsorship video, everybody knows that it's a commercial. Yeah. American people don't need to build when there are urban suburb slums all over the country. Americans live like old kings and queens. What did Queen say? If had balls, I'd be king. Haha. Well, whatever. Big dumb walrus. Yep, inland empire my whole life. Don't sell out, Simon. Just use clickbait titles. Yeah, I hear you guys. Like, I don't like the click. I did a clickbaiting title for a month, right? Like, every video I tried to make, like, clickbaiting kind of titles. And I was annoyed with myself for doing it, right? It totally works. It totally works. Like, I increased my revenue by 25% just by simply changing the titles around. And instead of doing very descriptive titles, I did, kind of clickbaity, fear-mongering title stuff, and it totally worked. I just did a recent video. I mean, I can't believe how many views is it. 175,000 views or something on a video I did earlier this week. And again, it's like, it wasn't, I don't think that one was really fear-mongering. To me, that was a very, like, you know, informative video. But I think a lot of people looked at it as, like, how do I know when the economy is going to crash? And they used, like, the idea of this number one indicator or lumber telling them when the economy is going to crash. At least that's kind of what I assume by it, because it's huge. It was hugely popular. So, I mean, I know it was a good video. It was a very informative video, and that's probably why it was so popular. But no, I don't want to sell out, man. I want you guys to sponsor the channel. I want you, the viewers, the people here on this channel, I want it to be here. Like, we don't need outside money coming into this. It's here. It's right here with us right now. You know? And so something as simple as just joining the channel, becoming a member of the channel. It's $1 a month, right? Like, it's the cheapest subscription on the internet. And as soon as the speeches break out, man, I try to inform you. There's a lot of Fed speeches that are just boring and, to me, aren't necessarily helpful to the understanding of monetary policy, although they are helpful because it gives you an understanding of what it is that the Federal Reserve is communicating out there. But when it comes to those monetary policy speeches that I try to review and share with you guys, to me, those are so, so profound to understanding what it is that's happening out here. All right, I'm hiring for a job, $1 an hour. Simon, one thing we disagree on, the narrative isn't to guide the market, it's the excuse for the market. Well, Thomas, I mean, you can go ahead and take in that consideration because, hell, everything is the meaning in which you're giving it, even me, you know, the meaning that I give the information. The only problem that I push back against that is that my understanding of what it is that they are planning on doing for monetary policy has been so far back that markets are not involved in the understanding or the strategy. So in order to consider that, I would have to change my entire belief system of how it is that the Federal Reserve is conducting their strategy, because then I would have to involve the markets into it. And there is nothing that I can find within their strategy that incorporates where it is that the markets are positioned. Not in the housing market, not in the stock market, not in the bond market, none of that stuff. All right? Everything that I have ever read on monetary policy has to do with narrative. Has to do with your understanding of elevated inflation expectations. It has everything to do with unemployment or the labor market. It doesn't have anything to do with the stock. I've never heard one statement from the Federal Reserve that says, well, when the stock market starts to crash, we need to do something about that. Never. Not one. I can't find it. People are like, you know, they say it all the time that they're bailing out the corporations, and I'm thinking, no, they're not. Not one thing within the Federal Reserve's charter gives them the ability to bail out a corporation. Now, if they have an unusual and exigent circumstance, like the pandemic, then they could set up a special purpose vehicle, fund it with hundreds of billions of dollars, scream out there into the mainstream media that they are buying up corporate debt, and then the whole market starts front-running the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve didn't have to buy anything at all. Like, they didn't buy any corporate debt they bought a little bit to establish the credible threat, but these corporations were largely able to fund themselves simply off of the idea that the Federal Reserve was setting up this special purpose vehicle, and the markets themselves went out there and tried to front run the Fed and funded these corporations. The Fed didn't do it, all right? Like, if they were saving the market, they just put out the belief that they were going to do it, but they didn't actually do it. You know? And again, that was the unusual and exigent circumstance of COVID that was kicking in. The Fed can loan money to banks, and then those banks can go and buy whatever, you know, they can buy into the stock market or whatever whatever it is that the banks want to do. But the Federal Reserve isn't directly doing that, although a lot of people say that's them directly doing it. They're not. They're lending that money to the bank, and then the bank goes off and does it. The Federal Reserve can't do that. There's only a handful of assets that they can legally buy. U.S. Treasury debts, mortgage-backed securities, gold, SDRs, foreign sovereign debt. They don't do it, but they could. Right? Those are the type of things that they buy. So, like, to understand that the Fed's monetary policy strategy and how it works, if you were to incorporate market manipulation into that, it would completely dissolve the entire strategy. It wouldn't work, because the strategy doesn't incorporate that. right? Now, I understand your belief does, right? And the meaning behind it, and there's probably a million economists out there who will describe how they do it, but not the Fed, not their charter, not in their own descriptions, and not anything that I can find within their strategy statements do that. Right? So everything else that people are saying that that's what they are doing as far as bailing out or supporting the stock market or supporting the mortgage market, it's artistic fantasies. They can't prove it. They can't prove it because that's not the case. Right? Now, in a roundabout way, if you want to say, okay, mortgage-backed security purchases and quantitative easing and all that other stuff, okay. All right, well, we can talk about that because that's a little different. But the outright just buying into the stock market or supporting the stock market in that fashion, no, that's not the way it works. Hannah, thank you so much for joining the channel. You're really going to enjoy those member-only live streams. All right, more separate from truth, the narrative, bigger the reward. No one approaches for selling out. It's just going with the narrative is what gets rewarded. Screws up here. Brody, laugh my ass off, Simon. You would love being approached about making propaganda, then making a video outing whatever made the offer. Yeah, I mean, I would too. I would really love that. Like, I would totally set them up like a bowling pin too. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'll totally do that. And then when it's time, I'm gonna like, hey man, I'm gonna do this on a live stream, and then just totally undo their stuff. I don't like, I'm not that type of person to like, you know, to go out there and try to disrupt somebody's operations or what they got going on. I mean, if that's what they like, I'm not one to get myself involved, but if you want to try and get me involved into that and try and pull me into something, right, now we got something else going on, you know. Please take a second to hit the like button, everybody. Well, thank you, Brody. All-nighter, El Pueblo, once is enough. Please don't spam the chat. Yep, thank you, All-nighter. You guys are doing an awesome job. I really appreciate it. You know, keeping the chat friendly and spam free. This is, you know, this is what we need here. Deplorable. I thought the Federal Reserve was just there just for these sort of situations. The Federal Reserve was initially established to create an elastic money supply. That's it. That was the whole intention. In that, being on a gold standard or being in an economy that had boom and bust cycles that were taking place back in the day, like they were like these business cycles, was very devastating because it was going to happen. You had a concentration of wealth that had to be redistributed back out to the people, and when that concentration of wealth happened, there was very limited amount of economic activity, which meant that there was a rise of depressionary pressures and, you know, soup kitchens and people losing everything in their life. And this was very difficult to try and work through. They were very quick, right? They were short and deep, but they alleviated themselves quickly, right? And so people had to understand going to go through business cycles, but they couldn't do it, wouldn't figure it out. Like when the money lasts forever, and then the business cycle would come to an end, and then boom, things would crash. So the establishment of the Federal Reserve was kind of like that when the economy was ramping up, right, and things were getting hot, and that concentration of wealth, because you think about it, it was a limited. This is what would slow the economy down, was this concentration of wealth. So the Federal Reserve was going to be there with the elastic money supply, that when this ramping up of economic activity and the concentration of wealth was going to happen, they were going to start pouring money in to keep the transactions moving, right? So as this concentration of wealth, they would add money supply to keep the hot economy going. But if the economy slowed down, all else being equal, they would start pulling money back out of the system. Right? This was the elastic money supply. However, that's not what the case is anymore. So the Federal Reserve has completely flipped. Now, when we think about slow economy, they're pumping money into the system to try and get it moving again. Right? But that's not what the original intentions were. When the economy would slow down, they would try to pull money out of the system. Okay? When the economy ramped up, then they would. That was their intention at the beginning. Now, you can't do that, because as you expand the money supply, the concentration of wealth continues to happen. And so then that's when the inequality was really growing. The more they printed up money, the more it would concentrate into the few hands. So they would have to constantly be printing up money in order to keep the growing from it. So the more that they keep putting this money into the system, the more inequality takes place. There's no way of saving that. You can't reverse this. The reversal of it is a boot on the face of humanity, meaning you don't get to enjoy your luxuries. You have to work twice as hard to pay off your debts. I mean, this is the type of environment that we would have to be in order to reverse the effects of inequality that is coming from the new money. It's ever increasing amounts of new money, more war, more debt, and more separation between the rich and the poor. That's what's going to take place. There's no other way of dealing with it, because of the pain that we would experience would be more than anybody would vote for. Like, you're not going to vote for somebody who's going to do that. When we do, like, think about what it is that Trump is attempting to do. Hold on 1 second. Am I on Wi-Fi? I am. All right. So you think about it, what Trump is doing. Oh, I got 1 minute, darn it. Okay, what Trump is doing was this idea that he wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Now, that, I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like a wonderful thing, right? Understanding that the Cantillon effect, meaning that once you have risen your standard of living, it's going to make it almost impossible to compete against the foreign producers out there. Like, almost impossible. How do you compete with foreign producers? You have to lower your standard of living so that your labor is in competition with their labor. Okay? If you don't do that, then you have to have ever increasing amounts of tariffs and subsidies. The moment that government gets out of the way, you lose your job. You lose your manufacturing job. It all flies over there to the foreign nations, because the underlying economic forces are at play. To understand why it occurred is to understand that it was a dive into luxuries and the production or the purchasing of foreign production. Right? That isn't going to, that you can't alleviate that. The only way to do it is to lower the standard of living of the people. And that's not going to be enjoyable, right? Everybody's going to hate it. All right, I like to keep out here talking, but I got to go. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.